Hi, welcome to ClayMake Studio. If we haven't met before, my name is Emma. Welcome. If we have met before, welcome back. Nice to sort of see you again. Today's video is all about glazes, how they work and how to use them, plus a few fun decorating techniques as well. If you think of any questions while this video goes, please make a note of them, and when you come into the studio, either Andrea or I will be very happy to answer any questions. Super. So, down here are our 14 glazes on a clay called PB103. That's the clay that we usually give students, so it's very likely that that is the clay that you used. When it comes to picking your glazes, it's really important to make sure you actually look at the tests from your clay, because there are lots of variables that go into how a finished product will look. Stuff like what clay body you use, which glazes you use, how you layer them, which way you layer them, how they're applied, what kind of kiln they go in, where in the kiln they go in, what kind of kiln, what they're next to in the kiln. So my advice from the very beginning is you will not be able to visualize what your finished pot looks like, especially when you're using new glazes for the first time. So, just have some fun and roll with it. We use PB103 in the studio because it's what's called a stoneware clay, because they do something called vitrify. Once they've been high-fired to 1280 degrees, which takes 3 days in one of our electric kilns, it becomes totally waterproof. So even without a glaze on, your pot will be dishwasher safe, microwave safe, food safe, lipstick proof, which is pretty groovy. So the glazes are kind of just there to make it look pretty, and that's what I'm here for. So when it comes to picking your glaze, it's important not just to take in mind the color, but also the texture. Some of our glazes, like midnight blue and clear gloss and translucent green, are what we call glossy glazes, which means not only are they shiny, but they also run in the kiln, which means they will, if you've got something with a lot of texture, it will emphasize this. These here are 2 cups with midnight blue on them. This is just a flat surface, and you have a really rich, flat color. This is exactly the same glazes, but on a highly textured cup. And you can see how it thins out on raised surfaces and it, pools on deeper surfaces. So you get an emphasis of the texture. This is what we call a glaze with a good break. On these test tiles here, there's that little line, and that's what it's designed to do, is to show you how it breaks. The other glazes we have are satin glazes. So that usually ends up with a flatter, smoother finish. So that's, up to you what sort of a look you like. Also keep in mind the actual texture of your piece. If it's something you're going to be picking up a lot, like a cup, you'll want it to feel good in your hands. So, if you are like stroking the glaze boards, I won't judge you. Because I personally really like satin glazes because they've got this kind of nice tactile element to them. Something else that these tiles show is what a glaze looks like when it's thicker and when it's thinner. When you apply a glaze, you're naturally going to have spots where the glaze is thicker and thinner, to do with the shape, the way you applied it, blah, blah, blah. And with some glazes, it makes a really big difference where it's thick and where it's thin. This is the pale blue glaze, and where it's thinner, you've got this kind of green mottly effect. And where it's thicker, you've got this soft sky pale blue. So some glazes have a lot of depth and characteristics to them, even without, fancy application. So over here we have a hot plate with melted wax in it. The benefit of using the hot wax is that because you've got a certain depth of it, you can get a really nice neat line all the way around the edge of your pot. Sometimes, if you say have a very curved shape, it can be quite difficult to tell how far back to wipe. So by using the wax, that kind of solves that for you. The downside of using the wax though, is if you aren't careful and you get a splatter you don't like, the only way to get it off is to re-misfire it. And no one has time for that, darling. So, how to do it neatly. You get your pot, you put it in, you let it sit for a little while, maybe give it a twist, and you pick it up and you do not turn it upside down and you do not splatter it, and you just put it down there on the mel line. And then you wax all of your pots. Once you're done, turn off the wax, flip it off, and you can see I've got this really nice neat line here. You want it to be kind of this soaked in colour, so that way, if it's too cold or it looks white, sometimes the glaze can get stuck underneath the wax and then it's pointless. So glazing. The glaze I'm going to use to show you guys how to glaze is the aubergine gloss. All of our buckets have their number and their name on it, because sometimes it can be pretty confusing when you open the lid. Because hey, look, aubergine gloss is green. I know, it's weird. I promise it will be purple. It does get confusing because like the blue glaze is pink, the purple glaze is green, but the grey glaze is grey, so that's like something at least. Because glazes are a suspension, they can settle really quickly. So it's important to make sure your glaze is well mixed every time you use it. Even if you've mixed it, it will settle even after a few minutes. So we've got some mixing sticks, and I'm just going to make sure that this is well mixed up before I use it. Yeah, that's looking all right. When it comes to applying a glaze, the easiest mistake to make is to overglaze it. If your glaze is too thick, that's when it runs a lot and sticks to the shelf. So the way to avoid that is just being really quick. Also, in order to avoid finger marks, I'm going to use some glazing tongs to hold my pot while I dip it in and out. And again, I'm going to be as quick as I can. No counting Mississippi's here, guys. All right, so in, out, in a kind of scooping motion. Hold it a little bit while it drips. And now, on the table, release and let it dry. You don't want to touch it before it's dry, because if you do, it's going to smudge off, and or even if you reapply glaze there, you're always going to have a mark. So what we need to do is not touch it, like I just did, until it looks dry and chalky. So this bits here are now kind of chalky, so I can now pick it up. Because bisque fired work, so things which have been fired once, are super crazy absorbent, it's going to soak up that water from your glaze really quick. So it shouldn't take long. I'm only going to put the one glaze on this, so the only thing left to do is to wipe off some of those little droplets of glaze on the base. Just damp sponge, wipe it back. Also making sure that I don't have glaze stuck on the sides as well, on the wax, because if you've got glaze stuck on your wax, it's going to flake off. Sometimes you can end up with tongue marks on your pot. The way to get rid of these, if you don't want them, is to, using a dry finger, wipe them down just a little bit to help even out that surface. Now you can keep them, and if you've got drips and stuff, you totally can keep them too. It's just up to what kind of a look you want. I rub it over the water, one, so that I don't get dust all over the place and have to do more cleaning, but also dust is like the biggest health hazard in ceramics, so we want to do what we can to minimize it. So, I got my little pot, and we're good to go. Ready for the cake. The next kind of shape I'm going to show you how to glaze is something with a bit more depth. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to glaze the inside and the outside a different colour. To do that, I'm going to use both dipping and pouring. So I've got my jug. I've got my glaze. I am going to mix my glaze up again because it has already settled. There we go. Let's not spill it all over the place, that would be good. So just like when it comes to the dipping, it's all about speed. So I want to be as quick as I can when it comes to this. So in, out, all right? Whenever you're glazing the inside a different color from the outside, it's important to always do the inside first, and you'll see why now. Okay, so in, out. And this is why we glaze the inside first. You're always going to get some sort of drip marks on the outside, simply because you're using liquids, right? That's how they work. So again, if you want to keep this as a design element, you totally can. However, I'm also going to show you how to wipe it off. So you get your sponge and you wet it and then dry it out as much as you can. You really don't want to be oversaturating your pot here, because if you do, the glaze won't stick to it. So I'm just going to wipe this off. So now I need to pick a second color for the outside. When it comes to using more than one glaze on a piece, you will always have a spot where the glazes meet, and they will always interact, kind of melt into one another. So with this cup, I've got the choice of it either meeting on the outside or on the inside. We will return to our friends, Midnight Blue. Both of these are using the same glazes. In this case, the glaze meets on the outside. So you've got that interaction there and these kind of icicle effects. This one, it meets on the inside. So that way you've kind of got a neater outside finish. It's up to you which way you do it. I think I'm going to do it this way. So, goodbye to aubergine gloss. And hello to pale blue. So this one here, which, to make things more interesting, is a weird brown colour. Nice. Mixing it up, using a different stick so we don't get cross-contamination. And now I want to just dip the outside. Depending on the shape of your piece, you might need to use tongs. But in this case, because I've got a high wall, I can dip it just like this, and that way I won't get tongue marks. Again, speed. Wish me luck. In, out. There we go. Not bad. Pretty close. So I put this down, and I wait for it to dry. So, waiting for it to look chalky. Let's have a look. Yep, not bad. And now my final dip, which is the lip. Now if you want to, you could totally do this in a third colour. That can be pretty groovy. So, in, out. Wait just a little bit to make sure it doesn't drip. Don't shake it unless you want drips, and there we go. Not bad. Again, making sure I don't have any glaze stuck to my wax. And we are done. So the last shape I'm going to show you how to glaze is something a little bit trickier, a big plate. If you've got a really big piece, it can sometimes be difficult to fit it in a bucket all in one go, especially if the bucket is a little bit on the lower side. So the easiest way to get around that is to dip once, let it dry, dip twice, and you're good. With this one, because it is so shallow, I'm not going to be able to fit it in the plate without burning myself, which I have done several times, so yeah, I know what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to show you how to wipe it back with a sponge as well. So because you're going to be double dipping, you do end up with a cross line. And my way of dealing with that is making it into a design element itself. This here is a little plate done by one of the students here, where she's basically made it into a little colour wheel, which is really cute because you've got where the glazes are interacting with one another. So I'm going to do something similar to that, using our friends Pale Blue and Aubergine. So give it another mix. And in, out, in, out. Now we let it dry. Oh, it's fizzing. Put it down on the table. And where's the lid? I don't know. Oh, here it is. And now I'm going to mix up my aubergine. When you have more than one glaze layered one on top of another, they're going to interact. So what I end up with is pale blue on one side, aubergine on the other, so this guy and this guy, and a stripe in the middle where they interact, and that kind of makes it interesting. So that's good. Dry enough to touch without smudging. Yep. in, out, in, out. So this bit here is going to be where those two glazes interact. While this is drying, this is a good time to show you these boards behind me. So what these boards show is how our different glazes look like on different clay bodies, but also what they look like when they layer one on top of another. Because we have 14 different glazes, we've got around 200 different options. I don't know, you guys can do the mental maths for me. I'm not going to try. But the basic way of how to read it is we go down. So first I applied pale blue, which is glaze number 7. So I go to here. And then the second glaze I applied was aubergine, so glaze 13. So I go along until I meet here. So that middle stripe of my pot is going to look something along the lines to this. As I like to say, these boards are a guide and not a promise, because all those variables I talked about before will come into play. When it comes to reading these boards, you do that across. It's a grid system, but also it will tell you which one you apply first. So I know you can't see it from here, but you will when you come to the studio. It says 7 pale blue, then 13 aubergine gloss. It is important to make sure you do it the right way around, because with some glaze combinations, it does really matter the order that you do them in. So always down and across. If you're not quite sure, Andrew or I will always be happy to go over it with you. So now that this is dry, I need to wipe the base. My sponge and scrubbing, basically, for ages. So I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I am going to show you how to tell if it's wiped back far enough. What I do is I hold it up flat with my eye line and I check. For something like this, I want about a 2 to 3 mil border. If I'm using a lot of shiny glazes or I'm applying it especially thick, I will wipe back more because that will run more. So, there's some basics on glazing. For the last part of the video, I'm going to be showing you guys a few different pots showing different decorating techniques. All of them are coming from around the studio and are made either by students or members or coming from our collection made by different artists. First one is this really sweet cup made by one of the wheelwork students. This is playing around with that color wheel, kind of double dipping kind of thing again, but applied to a different shape. And what's really nice here is she's chosen 3 different satin glazes. So you've got this nice consistent texture and a really complementary color palette. Another one that is using dipping for its design features is this pot here. So the inside is in satin green and the outside is in midnight blue. And the meeting spot is on the shoulder of the pot. So that way it's emphasizing the shape and kind of complementary to it. This piece here that is showing dipping is coming from Korea, and it's quite simple technique but very elegant. The whole thing in the base glaze, in this case a satin black, and then just the corner in this nice little glossy green, but held at an angle. And so not only do you get the contrast of satin and shiny, but you also get this kind of slight dynamic from the angle. Something that was made by our member Tara that's also playing with these angles is this pot here. So the glaze applied at an angle this way, then that way. But not only is it playing with angles, it's also playing with exposed clay bodies. Something that can be a lot of fun, seeing as we work with stoneware clays and they don't need to be glazed to be functional, is leaving parts of your pot unglazed. So I mentioned that there's 4 different decorating glaze application techniques. We've done pouring and dipping. Now a few examples of brushing. The reason why I didn't show you brushing as the main application is because the glazes that we have here are designed for pouring and dipping. If you only brush your glaze on, it can be really difficult to tell if it's too thick or too thin, and it's really common to end up with a patchy, underglazed finish. So the way around that is by first applying a base glaze. This one is by Andrea, and she used as satin white glaze. So first dip the whole thing in satin white. And then the color down here is brushed of a variety of different glazes. And because they're glazes and glazes melt, they all kind of interacted with one another, and you get this kind of quite dreamy landscapey finish. Another piece that's doing brushing and same technique but applied differently is this cut by our member David, where he's glazed the whole thing in translucent green and then painted the lines on the outside and then these really sweet polka dots on the inside. I think it's adorable. I love it. Another one by another one of our members, this time Owen, that's using brushing, is this bad boy here. But this one is a little bit different because he hasn't used a glaze to brush. He's used something called an engobe. Engobes are a type of liquid clay which you can use to decorate. And the big difference why you would choose an engobe instead of a glaze for painting is that because engobes are a clay, they don't run and they don't melt. So here you can see that the brush strokes have stayed really, really defined. Here he's also put just a clear gloss over the top. Because engobes are a type of clay, the finish can be very, very dry. So I do definitely recommend using a glaze over the top. My favorite example of how to pick what kind of glaze is this here. So we've got an engobe decoration on it. One half has clear gloss and the colors come out really bright and kind of distinct. This half is with the satin white over the top and it's a more muted finish. So it just depends on what kind of aesthetic you're into as into which style that you choose. I wouldn't recommend using a glaze that is too highly pigmented though, because that'll just hide your design. Such as, the bright blue satin would be probably a bad choice. And talking about bright blue satin, these are the last things I'm going to show you today. And these are resists. This one is a masking tape resist. So I cut up masking tape, stuck it to the pot in my design, dipped it all in the glaze, and then peeled the masking tape away. Where the masking tape was, we've got our exposed clay. In this case, I did purposely use a satin glaze because they run less. So it's good to keep in mind those sort of glaze characteristics. This one is done with a wax resist. We have wax emulsion here, which can be painted on your pots to create a design. So I painted this on and I glazed it, put it in the kiln. In the kiln, the wax melted, and we've got this cute little design here. What's super groovy about the wax resist as well is that it can be applied on top of a glaze. So you can put a glaze on, you can do some wax, put a second glaze on, and you've got that reveal, let's say. All right, guys, I've had enough of talking and you've probably had enough of listening to me. Thanks so much for watching and we look forward to seeing you in the studio soon. Ciao.